The train was robbed. They sent her in a coffin, but the cowboy heard her crying. The train had been robbed at dawn, leaving 3 dead and the desert floor littered with broken dreams. Cole Brennan arrived in Willow Creek as the October sun of 1867 reached its merciless peak, 2 days too late to stop the carnage, but just in time to help bury the dead. Sheriff Hartwell met him at the railway station, where twisted metal and splintered wood told the story of violence and greed. "Glad you're here, Brennan," the older man said, mopping sweat from his weathered brow. "Got steady hands, and you ain't squeamish about the dead. We got bodies need burying and cargo needs sorting." Cole nodded, surveying the wreckage. He'd been tracking this gang across 3 territories, always arriving too late, always finding their signature of destruction. The Vasquez gang didn't just rob trains. They made statements, leaving fear in their wake like smoke from a funeral pyre. Behind Henderson's general store, they'd set up a makeshift morgue in the shade of a cottonwood tree. 3 rough pine boxes held the victims, but it was the 4th coffin that caught Cole's attention. Unlike the others, hastily hammered together from whatever wood was available, this one was crafted with care, sealed tight with a brass nameplate that read, "Catherine Whitmore, beloved daughter." "That one was already on the train," Sheriff Hartwell explained, following Cole's gaze. "Bound for San Francisco. Poor girl died of consumption back in Denver. Family paid good money to have her shipped home for proper burial." Cole frowned, studying the ornate coffin. Something felt wrong, though he couldn't put his finger on what. The other bodies had been laid out for identification, but this coffin remained sealed, untouched, since the robbery. "Seems odd they'd leave this one alone," he said. "Robbers got their superstitions, I reckon. Don't like disturbing the dead." As the afternoon wore on, Cole helped sort through the scattered cargo, separating what could be salvaged from what was lost. Bags of grain mixed with bolts of cloth, tools scattered among broken pottery, the detritus of frontier commerce spread across the desert like seeds that would never grow. But something kept drawing his attention back to that coffin. As evening approached and the other men headed to the saloon, Cole found himself alone in the makeshift morgue. The desert wind had died to a whisper, and in the stillness he heard it, crying, soft, muffled, barely audible, but unmistakably human. Cole froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sound was coming from the sealed coffin, the one that supposedly held poor Catherine Whitmore, dead of consumption and bound for her final rest. But the dead don't cry. He approached the coffin slowly, his boots crunching on the dry earth. The crying grew slightly louder, a desperate, exhausted sound that made his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't name. "Hello," he called softly, feeling foolish even as the word left his lips. The crying stopped. Then, barely a whisper, came a voice cracked with thirst and hope. "Please, is someone there?" Cole's hands shook as he found a crowbar and began prying at the coffin's lid. The wood groaned in protest, nails screeching as they pulled free. Each second felt like an eternity as he worked, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cooling evening air. Finally, the lid came free. Inside, curled in the satin-lined coffin like a broken bird, lay a young woman. Her auburn hair was matted with sweat, her blue traveling dress torn and stained, but her eyes were very much alive. Green as spring grass and filled with desperate hope, they fixed on Cole's face like he was salvation itself. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "don't let them find me." Cole didn't hesitate. He lifted her from that pine prison, feeling how light she was, how her whole body trembled with exhaustion and dehydration. She'd been drugged, he realized, noting the telltale signs of laudanum, but the real damage came from hours trapped in that airless box under the desert sun. "Easy now," he murmured, cradling her against his chest as he carried her away from the makeshift morgue. "You're safe. I got you." As he walked toward his cabin on the edge of town, the young woman in his arms drifted between consciousness and sleep, but she managed to whisper her name. Isabella. Isabella Crane. Well, Miss Isabella, Cole said quietly, looks like somebody went to a lot of trouble to make folks think you were dead. Question is, why? Cole's mind raced as he pulled her from the coffin, his arms cradling her slight frame. She couldn't weigh more than a sack of grain, and her skin was clammy from dehydration and shock. Someone had drugged her, he realized, but the real damage came from being trapped in that box for hours without water in the desert heat. Easy now, he murmured, carrying her toward his small cabin at the edge of town. You're safe. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness as he settled her on his narrow bed. He'd built this place with his own hands after Gettysburg, when he'd needed somewhere quiet to forget the things he'd seen in '63. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a stone fireplace, but it was hidden in a grove of cottonwoods where the creek ran year-round. As he gave her small sips of water and bathed her fevered brow, she began to speak in fragments. Her name was Isabella Crane, and she'd been traveling to California to marry a man she'd never met. The train robbers hadn't taken her for money, she said. They'd been paid to deliver her somewhere else entirely. My uncle, she whispered, her fingers clutching Cole's shirt. He arranged the marriage, but the man, Marcus Donovan, he's not who he claimed to be. He's part of a gang that trades women across the border. Cole felt his jaw clench. He'd heard whispers of such operations, criminal networks that preyed on desperate families and isolated women. The war had left many orphaned and vulnerable, easy targets for men without conscience. Where were they taking you? He asked. Mexico, a place called Puerto Sombra. They drugged me at the last station, told everyone I died of consumption. The coffin was supposed to make it across the border without inspection. Over the next week, Cole nursed Isabella back to health, feeding her broth made from prairie hen and wild onions. She was stronger than she appeared, with a quick mind and steady hands that helped him tend to his modest vegetable garden. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, and she told him about her life in Philadelphia, where she'd worked as a seamstress after her parents died in a factory fire. I thought I had no choices left, she said one night, watching flames dance in the stone hearth. When my uncle said he'd found me a husband in California, it seemed like providence. Seems to me you got plenty of choices now, Cole replied, whittling a piece of pine. Question is, what do you want to do with them? The question hung between them like smoke from the fire. Cole found himself studying her profile in the flickering light, the determined set of her jaw, the way she unconsciously touched the small cross she wore at her throat. She wasn't like the saloon girls or the occasional widow who'd shown interest in him over the years. There was something untouchable about Isabella, a strength that suffering had forged rather than broken. On the 8th night, riders approached the cabin. Cole heard them coming long before their horses reached the creek. 6 men moving slowly through the darkness. He extinguished the oil lamp and pressed Isabella down behind his bed, placing his Colt Navy revolver in her hands. You know how to use this, he whispered. She nodded, her face pale but resolute. The men surrounded the cabin, their leader calling out in accented English. We know you have her, Cowboy. Send out the woman and nobody gets hurt. Cole recognized the voice from wanted posters. Diego Vasquez, a smuggler who operated along the border, known for his cruelty and his network of corrupt officials. The train robbery had been a cover for Isabella's kidnapping, and now they'd tracked her here. Don't know what woman you're talking about, Cole called back, checking his Winchester rifle. This is private property. I suggest you move along. A shot shattered the cabin's single window, sending glass across the floor. Isabella didn't flinch. We can do this easy or hard, gringo, but we're not leaving without our cargo. The word cargo made Cole's blood run cold. These men saw Isabella as nothing more than merchandise to be bought and sold. He thought of his sister Mary, who died young of fever, and how their father had always said that protecting women and children was a man's highest calling. The siege lasted until dawn. Cole used his knowledge of the terrain to his advantage, firing from different positions around the cabin, making the attackers think there were more defenders than just him and Isabella. When the sun finally rose, 3 of Vasquez's men lay dead in the creek bed, and the others had retreated to tend their wounded leader. But Cole knew they'd be back with reinforcements. "We need to get you somewhere safe," he told Isabella, as they shared coffee and hardtack in the bullet-scarred cabin. "I've got contacts in Tucson, people who can help you start over." Isabella set down her tin cup and looked at him with those green eyes that had haunted his dreams. "And what about you? I'll keep them busy. Give you time to get away." "No." Her voice was soft but final. "I won't run anymore." That afternoon, as they prepared to leave the cabin, Isabella asked about the photographs on Cole's mantel. One showed a young woman with kind eyes, another a family gathered around a Christmas tree. "My wife, Sarah," Cole said quietly. "She died 3 years ago. Cholera outbreak. We were planning to start a family." Isabella touched his hand gently. "I'm sorry. She was beautiful. She was good. Better than I deserved." He paused, studying Isabella's face. "She would have liked you." If this story has touched your heart so far, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with friends who love Old West stories. They traveled by night, following game trails through the Sonoran Desert toward Tucson, a journey of nearly 80 miles. Isabella proved to be a capable rider, handling Cole's spare horse with natural grace. They moved like shadows across the moonlit landscape, stopping only to rest the animals and share water from Cole's canteen. On the 3rd night, they made camp in a hidden canyon where ancient people had once painted symbols on the rock walls. Isabella traced the faded images with her fingertip, marveling at their beauty and mystery. "Do you think they were happy?" she asked. "The people who made these?" Cole considered the question as he built a small, smokeless fire. "I think they were survivors, like you." "Like us," she corrected. As they sat together under a canopy of stars, Isabella told him more about her dreams. She wanted to open a dress shop, maybe teach other women to sew and support themselves. She had $40 sewn into her corset, money she'd saved from her seamstress work. "It's not much," she said, "but it's a start." "It's more than most folks got," Cole replied. "And you got something worth more than money." "What's that?" "Courage. Not many women would have survived what you've been through." Isabella was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was so afraid in that coffin, not of dying, but of never really living, of never knowing what it felt like to be chosen, not just sold off like livestock." Cole felt something shift inside his chest, a wall he'd built around his heart beginning to crumble. "You ain't livestock, Isabella. You're a woman worth choosing." Their eyes met across the dying fire, and for a moment, the desert silence held them suspended between past and future, between fear and hope. The next morning brought trouble. Vasquez had found their trail and was closing in with a larger group of men. Cole counted 8 riders through his field glasses, heavily armed and determined. "There's a trading post about 15 miles ahead," he told Isabella as they broke camp. "Run by a man named Joe Clearwater, half Apache. He owes me a favor from the war. You can hide there while I deal with this. I told you, I'm not running anymore. This ain't about running. This is about staying alive." Isabella checked the chambers of the pistol he'd given her. "Then we'd better make sure we both do that." They reached Clearwater's trading post as the sun reached its zenith, heat waves shimmering off the desert floor like spirits dancing. Joe Clearwater was a mountain of a man, with silver-streaked braids and eyes the color of obsidian. He listened to their story without comment, then nodded toward the hills. Dust cloud coming from the south. 8, maybe 9 riders. "You don't have to get involved in this, Joe," Cole said. Clearwater smiled, revealing teeth filed to points in the old Apache fashion. "Anyone who puts a living woman in a coffin has already involved me, brother." The trading post became a fortress. Clearwater's sons, Samuel and David, took positions on the roof while Joe manned the back entrance. Isabella proved her worth by loading weapons and tending to a flesh wound Cole had taken during their flight through the desert. When Vasquez and his men arrived, they found themselves facing more resistance than they'd bargained for. The trading post had thick adobe walls and clear fields of fire in all directions. After an hour of futile attacks, Vasquez called for a parley. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Cowboy," he shouted from behind a boulder. "That woman belongs to Marcus Donovan. He paid good money for her." "Nobody owns me," Isabella called back, her voice carrying across the desert with bell-like clarity. "Tell your boss he can take his money and choke on it." Cole felt a surge of pride at her defiance. This was the woman who'd survived being buried alive, who'd crossed the desert without complaint, who faced down armed killers with nothing but a borrowed pistol and unshakable resolve. The standoff continued through the afternoon, both sides conserving ammunition and looking for advantage. As evening approached, Cole made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. "Vasquez," he called out. "How much is Donovan paying you?" $6,000, delivered alive." "I'll match that if you ride away and never come back." Isabella stared at him in shock. "Cole, you don't have that kind of money." Cole was quiet for a moment, then reached into his saddlebags and pulled out a leather pouch heavy with gold coins. "Bounty money," he said simply. "Been saving it for 3 years, figuring I'd buy some land eventually. 3 wanted men, 2,000 each." "Duck." What Cole didn't say was that he'd been planning to use that money to start over somewhere new, maybe buy a small ranch where he could raise cattle and forget about being a gunman. But looking at Isabella, he realized he'd found something worth more than land or security. The negotiation took an hour, with Vasquez demanding to see the gold and Cole requiring guarantees that Isabella would never be hunted again. In the end, greed won over loyalty. Vasquez took the coins and rode south with his surviving men, leaving Isabella free but Cole financially ruined. "You shouldn't have done that," Isabella said, as they watched the dust cloud disappear into the gathering darkness. "Money ain't worth a woman's life. It was your future, your ranch, your dreams." Cole turned to face her, his weathered hands gentle as they cupped her face. "Maybe my dreams just changed." They stayed in Tucson for 2 weeks while Cole recovered from his wound and Isabella regained her full strength. During that time, they talked for hours about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their pasts and tentative hopes for the future. Isabella proved as skilled with a needle as Cole was with a gun, and she quickly found work altering dresses for the town's ladies. Cole took a job as a deputy sheriff, his reputation for honesty and courage preceding him. On a warm evening in late November, as they walked along the creek that ran through town, Cole stopped suddenly and turned to face her. "Isabella," he said, his voice rougher than usual, "I know we ain't known each other long, and I know I ain't got much to offer besides a steady job and a willingness to work hard. But I'd be honored if you'd consider becoming my wife." Isabella's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling as she reached up to touch his weathered cheek. "Cole Brennan, I'd marry you if you didn't have a penny to your name, which, come to think of it, you don't." He laughed, the sound rich and warm in the desert air. "Guess we'll just have to build something together then." They were married the following week by Father Miguel at the small Catholic church on the edge of town. Isabella wore a dress she'd sewn from blue silk donated by the other women in Tucson, and Cole wore his only good shirt with a wildflower boutonniere Isabella had picked that morning. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, held in the late afternoon when the desert light turned everything golden. Joe Clearwater stood as best man, and Elena Martinez, the baker's wife, served as Isabella's attendant. The whole town turned out, drawn by the romantic story of the woman in the coffin and the cowboy who'd risked everything to save her. As they exchanged vows, Cole thought about the strange path that had brought them together. A train robbery, a drugged woman mistaken for dead, and his own stubborn refusal to let injustice go unpunished. Sometimes, he reflected, the worst things that happen to a person could lead to the best things if they had the courage to see them through. After the ceremony, they settled into a small adobe house near the creek, with 2 rooms and a kitchen garden where Isabella grew vegetables and herbs. Cole's work as a deputy kept them fed and housed, while Isabella's sewing business grew steadily as word spread about her skill and fair prices. One evening in the spring of 1868, 6 months after their wedding, as they sat on their front porch, watching the sunset paint the Catalina Mountains in shades of copper and gold, Isabella placed Cole's hand over her gently rounded belly. "Cole," she said softly, "what would you say to the idea of another Brennan joining us come October?" Cole's face lit up with a joy so pure it made Isabella's heart skip. "I'd say that Coffin might have been the best thing that ever happened to us." She laughed, the sound carrying across the desert like music. "Only you would find the blessing in being buried alive." "Wasn't the burying that was the blessing," Cole said, pulling her close. "Was the hearing. Most folks would have walked past that crying, told themselves it was just the wind. But sometimes, if you listen close enough to the sounds that don't belong, you find exactly what you've been looking for all along." Years later, when their children asked how their parents met, Isabella would tell them about the train robbery and the coffin, about courage and second chances, about a cowboy who heard crying where others heard only silence. And she would always end the story the same way, with the truth that had become the foundation of their life together. Sometimes being lost is the only way to find yourself. And sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest dawn. The Brennan family prospered in Tucson. Cole eventually became sheriff, known throughout the territory for his fairness and integrity. Isabella's dress shop became the finest in town, and she trained other women in the art of fine sewing, giving them skills to support themselves and their families. Their first child, a daughter they named Sarah after Cole's first wife, was born healthy and strong in October of 1868. She was followed by 2 sons, James and William, and another daughter, Catherine, named for the false identity that had saved Isabella's life. On quiet evenings, when the desert wind sang through the cottonwoods and the stars painted silver patterns across the sky, Cole and Isabella would sit together on their porch and remember that terrible, wonderful day when a train robbery had brought them together. They never forgot how fragile happiness could be, or how precious it was to be truly chosen by another soul. This story is entirely fictional and created for inspiration and entertainment purposes, not intended to offend anyone. If you enjoyed this Old West tale, please subscribe to our channel, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share it with others who love stories of courage, love, and second chances. Thank you for watching and allowing us to share these timeless stories with you.